Which one of you two want to experience hypnosis? Come up, buddy. You ready?
Yeah.
Ready to experience it?
Right.
Good. So you've never been into hypnosis before?
No, I've done a little bit with one of the guys.
The guys were just showing the demo. Okay, watch it. Put your hands like this. Rub your hands together like so. And all I want you to do is rub your hands together. Keep rubbing them together. And the moment the hypnosis goes through your hands, and as the hypnosis goes through your hands, now what's going to happen now is you're going to clamp your hands together. Bring your hands up like so. Bring your forefingers up like that. Look at the tips of your fingers. All I want you to do now is just stare at the tips of your fingers. You think you're a part of the bone.
When I was in medical school, my father told me a story. As a recent graduate, he was sent to work in a remote Egyptian village where most people were illiterate. One day, after a consultation, as the patient was walking out, he caught sight of a stethoscope hanging by the door. He turned round and said to my father, "But doctor, you didn't listen to my heart with the stethoscope." Without hesitation, my father asked him to place the stethoscope on his heart, which he did, and after a few moments, my father said, "Everything seems okay." The patient left completely satisfied. What I like about this story, besides my father's diabolical sense of humor, is that it unmasks the difference between what my father thought worked for the patient, say medication, and what the patient thought worked for himself. My father's patient might have felt cheated if he hadn't had the full stethoscope experience. After all, that's what doctors do, isn't it? They listen to your heart with their tools. It's a doctor's way of knowing what is happening inside you. The stethoscope was the visible, concrete sign that the doctor could know what was happening inside the body, which is normally invisible. I do wonder what this particular patient thought and believed about the role of the doctor and the stethoscope. But I'm a psychiatrist, and these are the sorts of things that I explore and investigate.
Where did you go when you went off to La La Land?
Oh, Greece.
When you Greece?
Yeah.
The second one this week is pissed off with Greece. It's weird though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Nuts, isn't it?
I tried to keep my fingers away from each other as well.
Yeah. So put your hands on top of there. Let me just try something. Just imagine, only imagine now, just imagine now that there's a powerful glue inside your hands now. Just imagine it there, that powerful glue pulling your hands together tighter and tighter and tighter. But just imagine now unwinding a hypnotic band around your hands. And as it gets tighter and tighter, tighter now, the more you try and pull your hands apart, the more they stick together now. There you go. That's fucked up, isn't it?
Oh, fuck, have you done that?
And your hands are unlocked now.
A child screams and convulses. It is in extreme bodily distress. Its screams are full-throated, piercing, full of emotion, making us move, to act. But what should I do? What does the scream mean? What is the child calling for?
In Italy, it would seem that Lucifer is not only alive and kicking, but his influence is spreading. So much so that the demand for exorcists has led to the Vatican training a whole new posse of priests to deal with the devil.
A medically unexplained symptom? A mother would wonder what to do. Sometimes it's hunger, and it's enough to feed the child, to answer the scream. Sometimes it needs its nappy changing, or it just wants to feel warm when mother carries it in her arms. So as carer, my first task is to interpret for the child its distress. The child doesn't know why it's screaming. It doesn't know what it needs. I interpret its distress, and as I do, I speak to the child, answering its wordless call with my words. The greatest gift a parent or doctor or healer gives to someone in distress is the words to describe distress itself. We clothe our pain, our bodies, in words and language. Words or signs point to something invisible inside me, my body, that is causing me pain or distress.
I casi sono molto aumentati rispetto al passato e potrei anche dirle i motivi, perché quando cala la fede aumenta la superstizione.
Toma tu perro escala por escala. Padre. Está arriba, lo que es todo lo que hace él. Que lo va primero y que lo caña, que lo primero. Que lo pone así, está muy mal.
Adiuro ergo te, serpens sanctife, per iudice rigoro e mortuorum, per ecclesia sinum recurrit, cum et exercitum furore.
Sometimes we use non-verbal signs, but which is still a language, such as the ritual of changing a nappy, or breastfeeding, or going to see your doctor and having the doctor put their hands on you, palpation, percussion, auscultation. These are all signs of or rituals of care. They are sometimes enough to respond to the scream of pain. That's what my father understood. If he had got into a discussion about educating the patient, for example, that it wasn't necessary to use the stethoscope, then my father would have completely missed the point. But the point that I'd like to make here is that the medical model is not the only model in town. What we think is the reason of our effectiveness as doctors is not the same as what the patient thinks makes us effective in healing them. To be a more effective doctor, psychiatrist or otherwise, is to keep this in mind. It's particularly useful to think like this when we are faced with so-called medically unexplained symptoms. What medicine lacks, the patient makes up for. It pays to ask the patient what they think is wrong with them. The patient may say initially that they don't know, but we may be surprised and surprise the patient that they in fact do know more about themselves than they think. This is the domain of psychosomatics. In psychosomatics, the maxim is that the symptom in the body has a symbolic meaning that is unconscious. Let me give you an example. I was on call in a psychiatric hospital one evening when a nurse who was off duty was brought to me by his family and friends because he was unable to speak. He was mute. I asked him nevertheless what was wrong, and he made grunting noises, pointing to his mouth, then looked at his father, who was standing next to him. This relational aspect of the symptom again becomes obvious, though many don't see it, which is that he pointed to his mouth, then looked at his father. Also, he came to see a psychiatrist. So the symptom is already being interpreted by him and those around him. I asked his father to tell me what happened. Father told me that they had had an argument, and his son, in anger, cursed him. In Egyptian culture, this is extremely frowned upon. There is a common expression which is difficult to translate. When someone says something offensive or insulting to you, you respond by saying, "Your tongue be cut off." This is what the father said to his son, and some time after, when the son's guilt kicked in, the internal distress, it hitched a ride on the injunction, the words of the father, and resulted in the conversion symptom of mutism. It's important to recognize the role of language in symptom formation and the function of the symptom itself. By becoming mute, the son partially reduced the pain of the guilt he was suffering from. He was in effect accepting the father's punishment, which was delivered as an injunction, your tongue be cut off, to manage his disturbing emotion. In this way, the symptom is constructed and conceived as a solution to the pain by binding the emotion through language in the theater of the body. The symptom isn't what needs to be treated. Obviously, the problem lies in the relationship with his father. This scenario also shows how the son ceded his autonomy over his body to his father. The body becomes the visible battleground of invisible forces. His father, through language and guilt, partially possessed his body, and when the son came to me, he was appealing for me to trade places with his father and relieve him of his guilt.
Come va? Meglio? Ok.
It all ends just like a meeting with a psychologist or a doctor, with the next appointment and another date with the devil.
Buonasera, ci vediamo non questo sabato, l'altro sabato mattina, va bene? Alle 10:30. Sì.
I will leave it to your imagination how this scenario could be modified in a case where the patient and his social circle believed in demonic possession, and how the doctor then takes up the position of the exorcist, or the exorcist the doctor. To summarize in a more formalized way, let's go back to my father's stethoscope. As I was saying, what the encounter brought into partial view was this junction or disjunction between two registers, the visible and the invisible, and also the place of the doctor as someone who stands in the doorway between these two registers. The doctor, like the exorcist, or the Greek figure of mythology, Chiron, a ferryman, carries something for the patient across the river Styx, but in the reverse direction, from the land of ghosts to the land of the living, from the invisible to the visible. This carrying or transporting for the patient by the doctor is called, in modern parlance, the transference. What is being transported is a message or symptom from the unconscious. The unconscious, or the doctor, is the boat that lies in the river or boundary between the psyche and the body. Again, the transference is the patient's transmission of their unconscious wishes, desires, distresses onto the person of the doctor. It is the transmission of a hidden cry, an appeal, a coded message from the patient's body in distress that is addressed to someone from the patient's past that you, the doctor, are standing in for. That's the symptom. One could think of the symptom as a letter, which is the message, in an envelope, which is the transference. But the letter doesn't arrive at its original destination. Instead, it is mistakenly delivered to the doctor's door because for some reason or other, the original addressee couldn't respond to it. The symptom here differs from the medical symptom, which is simply a conscious complaint by the patient. In this context, the symptom is a linguistic riddle, as in the case of the mute nurse, that is always entirely subjective and always relational, that is, addressed to someone for whom you are filling in. This, I hope, sheds some light on the nature of the bond that ties the doctor and the patient, and perhaps also the nature of the wider social bond at a group level. What do people seek from one another? What do they seek from authority figures, from heroic figures, from idols, or even ideals? Why are people willing, whether they are aware of it or not, to give up their autonomy in some measure to an other? What function or purpose does this serve? Perhaps the group or society has always had that power, that control over the individual. Perhaps it performs a curative function, a regulatory function, because the conditions of life are often painful and frustrating.